Hello everyone, welcome to our review for Mafia 3. As you're probably already aware, Mafia 3 is an open-world third-person shooter. It's also got some fairly significant stealth mechanics. I ended up playing through most of the game using stealth whenever I could. However, you're at no point required to use stealth. It's really just something I wanted to talk about because, as I said, I played most of the game that way, and it's definitely an option. As usual, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on graphics and sound. However, since this is a AAA release and graphics and sound are a little more important than most of the indie releases I've done in the past, I'm going to spend a little more time here than usual. I reviewed the game on the PlayStation 4, so just heads up for the PC users out there. I don't know what the situation is on PC. As far as the PlayStation 4 goes, and compared to other PlayStation 4 games, I think the game looked good. Graphically, there are a few standout things in the game, one of them being some very well done facial animation. However, the biggest things actually come from the death animations and also some contextual animation, mostly related to death animations, but some of the contextual animation the characters use are better than I've ever seen in a game. There are situations where you can be next to a car and go into like a melee combat with the enemy, and your character will use the car because it's there. You'll end up slamming their face into the car, and that's really impressive. There's also some situations where you'll pull a character because you're near a doorway. You'll pull them inside the doorway basically after you stab them. Just a whole lot of things that contextually I've never seen a game really do this, and it does it extremely well. And as I said, the death animations are great as well. It's never been more fun to shoot people and watch them squirm and die. So, essentially, very great death animations. And really great animations overall. Just overall, the animation in this game is really well done. However, there are a few graphical issues. Most of them are related to the lighting. At least that's what I found. I had issues where I would walk into a room that was well lit. You could see that the lights were supposed to be on, but the room itself would be dark. There's also a lot of texture pop in as you get close to things, especially as you're driving. And I mean, that's something that's pretty normal, especially in console games, when you're driving, things like that. However, it's really bad in some situations where you are very near things and you still have the textures going from low-res textures to high-res textures, and they definitely stand out. As far as sound, the voice acting in the game is excellent. Most of the voice actors did a really good job of portraying their characters, and you really get a good feel for the emotion they're trying to portray and things like that. I did run into a few weird things with the voice acting, where NPCs would repeat their dialogue a little too frequently. You might be hiding in cover for 30 seconds, and you may hear the same dialogue repeated a couple times just in that time frame. There's also a few instances where some more known voice actors, in particular Robert Clotworthy, hopefully I'm saying his name right, he voices Raynor in the StarCraft series. I recognized his voice, so it stood out a little more, but he has several different dialogue lines for several different, secondary NPCs, and every time I would notice his dialogue and think, I've already killed you, why are you still talking? And I might kill Raynor 5 times, and Raynor's still talking to me. So it was a little odd how frequently they use some of the dialogue, but again, it's not a big deal. It's just something that kind of stood out. Also, I feel like it should be noted that the music and the use of music in this game is excellent. They, of course, had some really good music from that time frame to draw from, but the music and the way they use it in this game is really top-notch. So, moving on to gameplay. Overall, the shooting in the game feels really good, nice and tight, responsive. Feels good for a third-person shooter. The enemies, for the most part, the amount of damage you do to them makes sense. You usually aren't shooting enemies forever. They're not real bullet spongy. Headshots kill almost every time. Overall, the stealth mechanics in the game are actually pretty good. They're not Metal Gear Solid good, but they're definitely good enough you can spend most of the time in stealth, and it works pretty well. I ended up playing almost the entire game in stealth, at least all the time I could. Eventually I would usually get spotted by an enemy, and at that point it would turn into a firefight, but until then I would use stealth, and it worked pretty well. Overall, the driving in the game felt really good. I wasn't a huge fan of the vehicle combat, but for the most part, the driving felt good. You've also got 2 options to choose from on driving. There's one that's a little more arcade feel. The other one, I believe, is a little more realistic. So you can actually choose and set that as you want. The game actually tells you about it as you're starting the game. But I played mostly with the arcade feel. I tend to like that kind of racing game as well. So I thought it felt really good. As I said, the vehicle combat, I was not a huge fan. There wasn't anything wrong with it specifically. It just usually felt a little awkward. You had to use a whole lot of buttons on the controller, and using like both bumper buttons and both triggers at the same time is just not my thing. So another big gameplay element is the AI. The AI in the game is mediocre to bad. As I mentioned, I used a stealth approach most of the time, and for the most part, enemy AI was just all over the place with how it reacted to stealth. I could stand behind a doorway and whistle, and that always brought one enemy at a time. No matter how close they are, it always brings one enemy. And as the enemies came to the door, I could stab them in the neck, pull them mostly through the doorway, even peeking out to, grab them and everything. And I could immediately then whistle again and get another enemy to show up and do the same thing. He should obviously be able to see the feet sitting in the doorway, but apparently he doesn't. And he comes, and I can do that. At one point I did it 4 or 5 times. I had a pile of bodies stacked up there, and the guys just kept walking through. They also respond a little odd to enemies being killed around them. If they see an enemy get shot, even if you're using a silenced weapon, most of the time they know immediately where you are, or almost immediately. It depends on how close they were to the person that got shot. However, you can also have a weird situation where you can shoot enemies while they're farther apart, and let's say one patrols back and finds a body. A lot of times he just mumbles something. I want to say there's some kind of dialogue there, but essentially he sees the body and then walks on as if nothing happened. He can find a pile of bodies. They don't come look for you. They don't do anything. They just walk their little patrol and ignore the dead bodies all around them. There were also some situations where I had enemies kind of see me through walls. I'm not sure if that's really in the AI section, but it's some odd programming somewhere. Essentially, I would see the meter fill up. They would be on the other side of a wall, but you could tell they could see me. Usually it didn't result in them actually coming to find me, but their bar was full as if they saw me. They just didn't actually engage. So that was a little odd as well. Maybe it was just a thing with the bars, but a lot of times when I went around the corner, they would immediately know I was there because they had kind of seen me beforehand. So it didn't happen a lot, but I did notice it here and there. It didn't really disrupt my game, but it was definitely present. In particular, the AI for the police in the game is very odd. The game kind of tries to explain this away by saying that these cops are probably taking bribes to look the other way, and that's why they're only interested in you. However, this seems to just be an excuse for the police to essentially ignore everyone else and everything else in the world and essentially only react to you. And that kind of creates some odd situations. I don't remember if I heard about it pre-release or if it was something they said in the game, but I remember there being something about if cops saw you breaking traffic laws or acting suspiciously, they may be more likely to go after you. That doesn't seem to be the case. I could break all kinds of traffic laws, short of hitting pedestrians. I could run into other cars. They seem to ignore me. However, if you tap into their bumper at all, they immediately open fire on you. The other weird thing I had happen involved a group of enemies showing up when I happened to be standing next to a bunch of cops. And the enemies started shooting me. I didn't even have time to pull a gun. And then all the cops started shooting me as well because I was engaged in a firefight, so they immediately tried to shoot me. It was pretty annoying. It was one of the few times that I had the game do anything really dumb to where it really did break the experience. They also didn't seem to mind when I parked my arms dealer's van right out in front of them and proceeded to purchase a whole bunch of weapons and also leave some in the street. They didn't seem to care about that, yet you tap into their bumper and they're ready to murder you. Another kind of odd thing is if you steal a car and there's a witness nearby, which there almost always is, they immediately try to run to a payphone and call the police. However, if I get out of the car, run over to them and punch them in the face and drop them in the middle of a crowd, nobody responds to that. Nobody even cares. However, I go steal a different car, somebody else from that crowd will then go try to call the police on me. It's kind of weird. It seems like there should be some kind of a reaction for going over and punching them in the face or smashing their face into the concrete, because those are your non-lethal takedown options. But overall, the enemy AI is just kind of all over the place, and as I said, it's mediocre to bad. Like, there's definitely a lot of holes in the AI. The other big gameplay issue is the repetitive nature of most of the game. The first 15% or so, and really the last 15%, are really kind of outstanding. They had me believing this game was going to be probably not Game of the Year material, but probably on the top 10 list for most places at the end of the year. However, the middle 70% or so is extremely repetitive. Outside of some Ubisoft games, I can't think of a lot of games that are this repetitive. Essentially, you go to a district, there's 2 numbers involved in that district, you'll talk to a couple people, you'll find out about both, and you'll essentially go out and do things like either kill certain people, kill groups of people, kill people and take their stuff, or kill some people around somebody and grab that person and interrogate them. Essentially, you will do that over and over and over again to fill out those 2 numbers. Once those numbers are full, you will get a specific mission to go kill one of 2 little mini boss NPCs. And when I say boss, they're not like a boss battle, really. They have a little more health than a normal enemy, but essentially you're just going in to find this person. Essentially, you'll kill those 2 mini bosses, and then you'll get a main boss for the area, and then once you kill that person, you get control of the district. You will do that same process probably, I want to say it's 10 to 12 times total. There's really no deviation from that formula. You go fill up those 2 numbers, you get 2 mini bosses, you kill them, you kill the main boss, you move on to the next district. You do that 10 or 12 times until the end. So after you get done with those repetitive missions, there's actually kind of an interesting upgrade system where you have 3 crime bosses basically that report to you, and you can assign pieces or the whole district to that person. You end up having to assign the whole district at the end once you're done capturing all of it. But essentially there's the 2 pieces. You can assign each one of those to different bosses if you want, and then assign the whole district to one of those bosses at the end. Each one of those assignments basically gives you some perks and benefits, things like that. It's actually kind of a clever system. The only downside with the whole system is the upgrades don't really feel very meaningful. And it's not because the upgrades are bad, really. It's just that the rest of the world, which kind of brings me to my next point, but the rest of the world is fairly bland. What you're doing is fairly bland. And so you don't really get a chance to, you don't really have a need to use these things. These abilities you get, these perks and bonuses you get, these special weapons you unlock, there really isn't a need, because pretty much everything you're fighting, everything you're doing is the same at 25% of the way through as it is at 80% of the way through. I mean, it's the same gameplay loop over and over again, so it doesn't really make you want to try to earn those upgrades to make anything easier, because you've already been doing it essentially. You just have a few more enemies than you had before. So that brings me to my next point. Overall, this world is pretty bland. And when I talk about the world being bland, I'm not talking about the design or artistic design or anything like that of the world. All of that's really well done. I actually fairly recently visited New Orleans, and this actually is a very, very impressive recreation of that. There's a whole lot of the streets that really felt familiar. I went to the French Ward in the game, and it's a whole lot like walking Bourbon Street, except without the smell of urine. But other than that, it was basically like walking Bourbon Street. And that's all really impressive. However, the issue is that you don't have a lot of interactions with the world. As I said, you do the same thing over and over again, and when that's the gameplay loop, that really hurts the rest of the game. It makes the whole rest of the world not feel important. You don't really have any real interactions with the rest of the world, and therefore it feels pretty bland. And really that's the same with the upgrade system. Because you don't have any need to use it, it doesn't feel meaningful in any way. So at least that's my take on it. Okay, so I'm also going to take a little bit of time to talk about the story. I'm going to try not to give any spoilers, but I am going to try to just talk about my overall thoughts on the story. I haven't really done this in most other videos, but most of those games haven't had a story. So, story is actually something that's fairly important to me. I really can enjoy playing a game just for the story. So, a good story can hook me. For the most part, the story in this game is really well done. It's actually got an excellent ending. I'm actually somebody who is extremely picky on endings. Almost every TV series that I've watched, I've hated their ending. And essentially, the way this game ends is one of the best endings that I can think of in a game. So, really well done. That alone kind of made my playthrough worthwhile. I really, again, the first bit of this game and the last bit of this game are absolutely the best. It's also got great dialogue. The writing for the game is actually really well done. The characters are all very well realized and things like that. The exception kind of is the main character. Your main character feels a little less than some of the other characters. For me, my big issue with him is his moral compass seems to be kind of all over the place. There are times where he's really concerned about certain injustices and things in the world, but on the flip side, and this is spoilers somewhat, I'm going to be vague, but these are spoilers. Essentially, there's a scene where you pretty much directly get a whole bunch of people killed, and we're not talking enemies, we're talking civilians. And there's really no talk about it. There's no impact from it. He basically just gets a whole bunch of people killed because he needed to do this other thing. And that's basically the end of it. There's never any more discussion about it, and they never touch on it later. That's just it. And that probably wouldn't have been an issue if the developer had actually opted to give the player more of the choice. However, for the most part, the game is telling you who that character is. Instead of allowing you to make choices and kind of craft that character in your mind, which is essentially what those choices are mostly doing. They're allowing you to flesh out that character in your mind. Instead of doing that, the game is actually telling you who that character is. And so when the game gives you conflicting information, that kind of creates this weird situation where you don't feel like the character is acting as they should be. Or at least that was my situation. And to be clear, there isn't an issue with telling a story like that and telling the player who the character is without giving them those choices. However, if you're not going to give the player those choices, then you have to make sure that you really flesh out your character correctly and that you don't have conflicting information, because you can't depend on them to have a version of that character in their mind. Instead, you're developing that character, and you have to make sure it fits with the rest of your story. Overall, Mafia 3 is a good but repetitive game with some issues. To me, it actually feels like a game that should have had some delays, or if you'd told me that the game had already been delayed several times and, its release date had been pushed back, I would have thought, okay, they just couldn't get everything done. However, the release date on this game has actually been pretty firm, at least as far as I'm aware, so I'm kind of surprised they didn't push it back to get a little more time. Really, what this game feels like is they had a really good base for the game, and then somebody said, well, we need to release it by this time, and they just shoved all the repetitive crap in the middle and pushed it out that way. As I said, the first 15 and the last 15% are extremely well done. They are, quite a bit above the rest of the game. However, the whole middle section is just so repetitive and generic, I can't help but feel like they just didn't have enough time, and that's kind of mirrored in some of the AI issues that I feel like beta testers would have caught. It's also in the just kind of the way some of the gameplay elements work, and also in the way that some of the bugs that I ran into work. I've had voice dialogue repeat over and over again. I had just a whole bunch of weird issues with cars suddenly showing up stacked on each other. I had a weird explosion where I spawned into an area and two cars seemed to stack on top of each other and then immediately exploded. I just had a whole lot of weird issues, and that's just the ones I recorded. I had a whole lot of weird issues. Things that I feel like if the game had really had the time it needed, those would have been caught, those would have been fixed. Some of the weird issues with the storyline, I think, would have been caught and fixed. Really, that's just some of the back and forth on the morality issues I think the character should have responded to, at least. But anyway, I feel like there are parts of this game that just didn't have enough time in the oven, and it kind of is weird to me that it was pushed out without any real delays, because I feel like this game could have used some delays. The other interesting thing I want to say about this game is it's a game I feel like the DLC could be better than the actual game. And I can't think of a game I've ever thought that about before, but that really could be the case here. I could easily see some good DLC being far better than what most of the game was. again, the beginning and end were great, but the middle was just filler, essentially. And I feel like a DLC that kind of knew what it was and was going for a short experience, I feel like that would have worked fine. So, anyway, I would watch for DLC. The DLC may be better than the whole game itself. So, as far as a score, this game for me is a 7 out of 10. It's still a good game. It's definitely not a great game. It could have been. Honestly, this could have been probably an 8 or a 9 for me if they had just polished it up some and they had done something more interesting with the gameplay in the middle rather than repeat the same thing 10 or 12 times. So, really, it's got an excellent start and an excellent finish. I mean, it's really well done there. Good responsive shooting controls, interesting characters and setting. It's got excellent use of music and location. It's also got some of the best, as I said, some of the best death animations and contextual animations I've ever seen in a game. So all of that's really impressive. But some issues drag it down. The poor AI, it's, as I said, extremely repetitive. The world is just bland. There's not a lot of interaction there. And it just feels like it had a lack of polish. It needed some more time in the oven. It just really needed some more work. So I don't know what happened there, but that's my thoughts on the game. Okay, so now to kind of cover who I think this game may be a little better for than it was for me. If somebody, let's say, was really looking for an open world game, something like that, if that's what you're really looking for, or the Mafia theme is really drawing you in, or something else about the story's theme, maybe the race issues are something you want to look at more, this could be better for you. Probably not a whole lot better, because as I said, the other issues are pretty significant, but this could be closer to an 8 for you. That theme, that Mafia theme especially, will get a lot of people in, and that's not something that's particularly strong for me, but people that really love that theme may still find a whole lot of enjoyment out of the game. But either way, you're going to have to put up with a lot of repetitive stuff to get through it. On the other end of the spectrum, for some people, this game is going to be bad, and there's really no way around that. A lot of people really hate the repetitiveness. A lot of people hate a lot of Ubisoft's open world games, which, again, this isn't Ubisoft, but it feels like one of their games. And I mean that in the worst aspects of their games. It feels extremely repetitive. The worlds don't seem very well done. I mean, it's definitely got issues there. So people that are tired of open world games, people that hate that Ubisoft formula for open world games, are really probably going to dislike this. Anyone that's sensitive about race or gender issues, there's gender issues I didn't even cover, but there's race and gender issues come up a lot in this game. And it's something that may make people uncomfortable. It also, as I said, shouldn't be played by kids, and really shouldn't be played anywhere near kids. So that's something to keep in mind with the game. Also, for some people, repetitive gameplay is their kryptonite. And if repetitive gameplay is your kryptonite, stay away. This is one of the more repetitive games I can even remember playing. It is extremely repetitive, and while the theme and the gameplay is all solid, unfortunately, it's just insanely repetitive. Like, I was able to get through it. Had I been playing just me, without doing the review, I don't know that I would have made it through the game. Which would have been a shame, because, as I said, the ending is one of the best endings I've seen in a game in a long time. Really enjoyed it. There's also the issue of lack of polish and things like that. A lot of non-game breaking bugs. I did have the game crash on me once, but for the most part, most of the bugs were just either laughable or annoying. There are some things with the AI, not really bugs, but being underdeveloped, that were more than a little annoying. Things like being shot by police as other enemies attacked me, or at one point, basically these enemies spawning outside of a door and just murdering me before I had a chance to really do anything. There are some situations that you can't avoid, and you feel like the deaths aren't really your fault. It's really the game not being designed very well. And I shouldn't say that. It's designed well in part, but there's a lot of issues with the AI and just some things that really need to be looked at. So if lack of polish and things like that and non-game breaking bugs are going to be an issue, graphical issues, things like that, again, this could be really bad for you. But really, it's the people who should really avoid this are people who are sick of open world games or have huge issues with repetitive gameplay, because this has a crap ton of repetitive gameplay. So that's all I have for Mafia 3. Overall, like I said, good game with some issues. If you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up, maybe subscribe. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. Either way, you can let me know in the comments below why you felt that way. Also, if you enjoyed the video, maybe share it. That always helps. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.